Mind-Brain Talks, the place where you find diverse and scientifically accurate information regarding psychology, neuropsychology, neurosciences, and research methods every single week. My name is Bruno Faustino. I am a licensed clinical psychologist and neuropsychologist who's been working as a therapist, researcher, and educator for the past few years. Here in Mind-Brain Talks, I discuss and describe different topics from psychology to neurosciences, and I try to explain them the best as I can for you to understand and for you to learn something more about it. All research here are just for educational purposes, and it's not intended to diagnose any psychiatric condition or neurological disorder. So, without further delay, let's jump for today's content. So today I'll talk about emotional experience. I'll take a brief look of the major topics of emotions, and we will see how emotional experience may impact in different areas of human functioning. But first, let's see the manuals that I recommend to you today. The first is The Emotional Brain from Joseph Lido. The second is True to Our Feelings. And the third is the Handbook of Emotional Regulation, edited by James Gross. And now let's look to emotions. Emotions are the short-term biological states associated with neurophysiological changes which provoke us thoughts, feelings and behavioral responses or action tendencies. Emotions tend to be discrete, measurable and physiologically distinct from one another. Emotion experience is different from emotions. So, emotional experiences is the subjective experience of emotions or emotional states. Emotions are the short-term biological states, and emotional experience is the subjective experience that individuals have when they are experiencing emotions. And emotional experiences may be described as pleasant or unpleasant, and may be described as intense or mild. Emotional states are accompanied by arousal and our experiences of the bodily responses created by the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. So, emotional states are accompanied by different bodily sensations which represent a sympathetic activation of the autonomic nervous system. Emotions are developed in large part to help us to make rapid judgments about stimuli and to quickly guide appropriate behavior. That's why emotions set some behavioral tendencies. Emotions have a great neurobiological emphasis because they are produced in the limbic system, which encompasses amygdala, hypothalamus, thalamus, and is not close to this, and emotions are also generated by some divisions of the prefrontal cortex, such as the anterior cingulate or the orbitofrontal cortex. Moreover, we can find different emotions. We can distinguish from basic emotions to complex or secondary emotions. So, basic emotions we can see as anger, disgust, fear, happiness, sadness and surprise. And these emotions tend to be generated at the subcortical level. And these emotions are evolutionarily determined, and typically they are experiences and displayed similarity across cultures, because these basic emotions have a great neurobiological emphasis and great genetic determinism. That's why from different cultures, individuals tend to express them psychological, emotionally and behaviorally in the same way. However, we can also differentiate other emotions, which are defined as secondary emotions, or some researchers may refer it as feelings. I have here some examples, such as frustration, distress, bored, calm, satisfied, and so on. There are different secondary emotions which have different intensities and different forms of experiences. Typically, these emotions are generated at the cortical level because they have a great input given by the prefrontal cortex. So, secondary emotions tend to be associated with cognitive interpretations that accompany emotions. Typically, you can call this process as cognitive appraisal. So, typically, secondary emotions are determined in part by their level of arousal, which can range from mild to intense, and their valence, which may be pleasant or unpleasant. As you are seeing, emotional experience is a major aspect of the human life and has different implications on human functioning. So, we can find two major pathways for emotion generation. primary and secondary emotions activation may depend on the pathway by which the stimuli takes to reach the cortex. So we can look by analyzing the fear processing in different brain regions. We can have a stimulus. This stimulus projects itself to the thalamus sends information to amygdala, which also then projects a response. We can call this the fast pathway. So, but when we look to the danger sensation or the sense of afraid in a given context, we are looking to a different set of activation. We can have a stimulus that reaches to the thalamus, and the thalamus projects outputs to the frontal cortex, and then the frontal cortex projects the information to amygdala, and then amygdala produces a response by projecting information to the primary motor cortex. So we are seeing here that in the danger sensation we have a frontal cortex input, and this input gives some context and some previous knowledge about the stimulus. So in this sense we have a mixed response where we have a stimulus and we have cognitive interpretation or a cognitive memory. So we call this a slow pathway. And the secondary emotion is generated because it has more cognitive component than the primary fear. So this is an important distinction between primary emotions and secondary emotions or feelings. They may depend on the different activations which are the product of different pathway activations. So one major aspect that could make some difference between secondary emotions and primary emotions is the cognitive reappraisal, which is a process that is tendency allocated in the prefrontal cortex, because the process of the cognitive appraisal may be seen as the interpretation of the situations and experiences based on the previous knowledge. So, this interpretation is based on previous assumptions and beliefs, and in intentions, goals, or even in psychological needs. So, cognitive appraisal adds a cognitive component to the primary emotion. This is when we start to feel a more complex, a more differentiated emotion, which is called here a secondary emotion or even a feeling. So there are different models of emotion that could also help us explain how emotion is generated. Cannon-Barr theory states that experience of an emotion is accompanied by physiological arousal. James Lange theory states that the experience of an emotion is the result of the arousal that individuals experience. So, the two-factor theory states that the intensity of the arousal and the cognitive appraisal dictates which emotion individuals will experience. So here we can see that the two-factor theory has an integrative component, where we can explain that the arousal and the association of the cognitive appraisal dictates which emotion will be generated and which emotion individuals will experience. So emotions have different functions. One may be facilitate adaptive responses to environmental challenges. A second may be attach meaning to the events. The third may be communication to self about values, needs, or even if the context is favorable to them. Or even communication to others, because when we manifest an emotion, we are communicating to others an internal state or a disposition, and this behavioral manifestation may be seen as non-verbal behaviors. So, now let's just summarize the contents of today. Emotions and subjective experience are different phenomena, but they are linked together. This phenomenon results from the interaction between the brain, nervous system, and endocrine system. We can differentiate primary and secondary emotions by the level of the arousal and the addition of a cognitive component, and we look to different models of emotions. So, this is just an introductory video related to emotions, but in the future I will produce different videos focused specifically on different aspects or different models of emotions, okay? So, stay tuned! Well, it's all for today. Don't forget to see the video description regarding today's theme in order to see the manuals and the books that I recommend to you. Also, if you like what I'm doing here, please consider to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. And you can use the comment section below to express your thoughts and to express your mind. Let me know what you think about all of this. Welcome to Mind Brain Talks, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye!